kid walks up to a motorcycle clubhouse with nothing but a scratched helmet and a cardboard sign asking for $5. The bikers could have laughed him off. Instead, they asked one question that changed everything. Why are you really here? What came next wasn't charity. It was brotherhood. The gravel crunched under Rick's worn sneakers as he approached the Iron Breed MC's clubhouse. His hands trembled around the dirt bike helmet, fingers white-knuckled against the faded blue surface. The cardboard sign tucked under his arm felt heavier than it should. Just 2 words and a number scrawled in black marker, but they carried the weight of everything he had left. The clubhouse sat at the end of a dusty road, a low-slung building with motorcycles lined up out front like soldiers at attention. Chrome gleamed in the afternoon sun. Leather vests draped over bike seats. Music thumped from inside, something with a heavy bass that Rick could feel in his chest. He'd walked past this place 100 times on his way to school, always crossing to the other side of the street, always keeping his head down. Bikers were supposed to be dangerous. That's what everyone said. He stopped at the edge of the lot, just where the pavement met the gravel. 3 bikers sat on a wooden bench near the entrance. One noticed Rick first, a big guy with a gray beard braided down his chest. He nudged the lean figure beside him, sun-weathered and sharp-eyed. "Kid," the bearded one called out. "You lost." Rick shook his head and held up the sign. $5, please." The third biker, a woman with her dark hair pulled back tight, leaned forward. "What are you selling?" Rick lifted the helmet higher. His voice came out smaller than he wanted. "This is a good helmet, barely used." The lean man, hairy, his vest patch red, stood and walked over, hands visible. Up close, Rick could see the lines around his eyes, the scar cutting through one eyebrow, the way his expression shifted from curiosity to something else. Concern, maybe. $5 for a helmet? Harry crouched down to Rick's eye level. "That's a hell of a deal. What's the catch?" "No catch." Rick's voice cracked. I need the money." Harry reached out carefully and took the helmet, turning it over in his hands. Inside, written in faded Sharpie on the foam liner, 2 names, Dan plus Rick. "This belonged to someone," Harry said quietly. "My brother." The words tumbled out before Rick could stop them. "He gave it to me for my 10th birthday. We used to ride together on his dirt bike, and he said I needed proper gear, so he saved up for 2 months and—" Rick stopped, blinking hard. "He's in trouble. Real trouble. And I heard someone at school say court stuff costs money, like thousands of dollars, and I don't have anything else to sell. So I thought, hey, slow down." Harry's voice was gentle. "What kind of trouble?" Rick's eyes dropped to the gravel. "He got arrested. There was a fight, and the cops took him, and he hasn't come home in a week. I went to the place where they keep people, but they wouldn't let me see him because I'm just a kid, and the lady at the desk gave me this paper." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a crumpled notice. "It says arraignment and bail and all these words I don't understand, but I know Dan needs help." The clubhouse door swung open. More bikers filed out, forming a loose semicircle. Panic flared in Rick's chest. Harry held up a hand, silencing questions. He studied Rick's face, the helmet, the paper. "How old are you?" 12. "And where are your parents?" "Mom died 6 months ago. Cancer. Our stepdad left right after the funeral. It's just me and Dan now." "Was just me and Dan." Rick's voice broke on the last word. "He's 19. He was taking care of me, making sure I got to school, that there was food. He worked 2 jobs, but then he started hanging out with these guys who—" Rick stopped, unsure how much to say. The dark-haired woman stepped closer. "I'm Dakota. What's your name?" "Rick." "Rick. When's the last time you ate?" He blinked at the unexpected question. "Breakfast. There's cereal at home." "And when's the last time you ate something that wasn't cereal?" Rick couldn't remember. Harry stood, still holding the helmet. He looked at the other bikers, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Rick. "You're not selling this helmet. You understand me? This isn't about $5 or $1,000. This is about your brother, and you showing up here with the one thing you've got left of him." He placed the helmet carefully in Rick's arms. You're showing us who you ride for. And that matters. Rick clutched the helmet, confused. But we know what Dan needs, Dakota said. And it's not your brother's helmet on some stranger's shelf. Come inside. You're going to tell us everything, and we're going to figure this out. Rick looked at the clubhouse door, then back at the faces surrounding him. They weren't laughing. They weren't sending him away. The bearded man, his vest said Tiny, which seemed like a joke, gestured toward the entrance. You walked all the way here by yourself? Tiny asked. Rick nodded. 3 miles. 3 miles. Harry shook his head. Kids got more spine than sense. But he was smiling, just a little. Come on, Rick. Let's see what we can do about your brother. As Rick walked toward the clubhouse, helmet tucked against his chest, something shifted. These strangers everyone warned him about were listening. Hope flickered where fear had been. The clubhouse smelled like motor oil, leather, and old coffee. Rick sat on a worn leather couch, helmet in his lap. The iron breed had shifted into focus mode. Harry sat across from him, elbows on knees. Dakota leaned against the pool table. Tiny stood by the door with 3 others. Harry pulled the crumpled notice from his pocket, smoothing it against his thigh. Okay, Rick, let's start from the beginning. Tell us about Dan. Rick's fingers traced the scratches on the helmet. He's the best person I know. When Mom got sick, he was 17. He dropped out of his senior year to take care of her, work, and make sure I didn't miss school. Our stepdad, Frank, he'd come home drunk and... Rick's jaw tightened. Dan would get between us. Always. He took things that should have been meant for me. Where's Frank now? Dakota asked, her voice hard. Gone. Mom died in March and Frank cleared out the same week. Took what little money she had saved and disappeared. We haven't seen him since. A younger biker with tattooed forearms spoke up. So Dan's been your legal guardian? I don't know if it's legal. Nobody ever came to check. Dan just kept doing what he always did. Getting me up for school, packing lunches, working at the auto shop, and doing night shifts at the warehouse. Rick's voice grew quieter. But after Mom died, something changed. He got angry all the time. Not at me, just at everything. He started staying out late. Made friends with these guys who were always talking about easy money and side jobs. I heard them once, outside our apartment. They wanted Dan to help move some stuff, didn't say what. Dan told them no, but they kept pushing. Rick looked up. Then 2 weeks ago, Dan went to Murphy's bar. He called me, said he'd be home by 11. He never came home. Dakota moved closer. What happened at Murphy's? I don't know all of it. The police report. Rick gestured to the paper in Harry's hand. Says Dan assaulted someone. But Dan's friend Marcus told me Dan was trying to stop a fight. These 2 guys were beating up someone in the parking lot, and Dan jumped in. Rick's voice rose with frustration. He was helping, and now he's the one locked up. Harry read through the notice carefully. Says here the guy he hit ended up with a broken jaw. That's serious. But he was protecting someone. Rick's eyes burned. That's what Dan does. He protects people. I know, kid. I believe you. But the law doesn't always care about context. Harry passed the paper to Dakota. We need more information. Who's the prosecutor? Who are the witnesses? The tattooed biker pulled out his phone. I've got a buddy who works county lockup. Let me make some calls. Tiny rumbled from his position by the door. My cousin's a public defender. Might be able to get us some insight. Dakota studied the document, her expression sharpening. Arraignments in 5 days. That's not much time. She looked at Rick. Has Dan tried to contact you? No. I went to see him, but they said only adults or lawyers. I'm neither. The defeat in Rick's voice was palpable. Harry stood and walked to a corner desk, pulling out a notebook. All right, here's what we're going to do. Fred. He gestured to the tattooed biker. Call your buddy and your sister. Didn't you say she works in legal aid? Fred nodded. Celine. She handles cases like this all the time. Pro bono stuff for people who can't afford private attorneys. Get her on the phone. Tonight. Harry turned to Tiny. Talk to your cousin. We need to understand what Dan's up against, what the best and worst outcomes look like. Dakota pushed off from the pool table. I'll start drafting a character letter. Rick, I need you to tell me everything about what Dan's done for you. Every sacrifice, every moment he stood up when he didn't have to. We're going to paint a picture of who your brother really is. Rick blinked. You're really going to help? Harry crouched down in front of him again. Rick, you walked 3 miles to sell the one thing you had because you thought it might save your brother. That tells me everything I need to know about both of you. Dan raised you right. Now it's our turn to stand up. But why? Rick's voice cracked. You don't even know us. Harry was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. 20 years ago, I was Dan. Different circumstances, but the same story. A kid trying to do right by his family and getting hammered for it. Nobody stood up for me back then. I spent 2 years in a cage learning that the world doesn't care about your reasons. He focused back on Rick. But I also learned that family isn't always blood. It's the people who show up when you need them. The iron breed? We're family. And right now, you and Dan need someone to show up. Tears welled in Rick's eyes. He'd held it together for months. Now, surrounded by strangers who felt like something more, the dam broke. Dakota sat beside him, pulling him into a careful side hug. It's okay. Let it out. You've been carrying this alone too long. Fred was already on his phone, pacing near the window. Celine? Yeah, it's me. I need a favor, a big one. There's a kid here whose brother's in county lockup facing assault charges. And the story doesn't add up. Tiny grabbed his jacket. I'm heading out to talk to my cousin face to face. Be back in an hour. Harry wrote rapidly in the notebook. Rick, when you're ready, I need names. Dan's boss at the auto shop, teachers at your school, neighbors who've seen what he does for you. Anyone who can vouch for his character. Rick wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Mr. Patterson at the shop. He always said Dan was the best young mechanic he'd ever hired. And Mrs. Fisher, my math teacher. Dan came to every parent-teacher conference, even when he was exhausted. Good. That's good. Harry kept writing. Rick looked around the room at these people mobilizing around a problem that wasn't theirs. For a kid they'd just met. The helmet sat beside him now, no longer something to sell but something to hold on to. Thank you, Rick whispered. Harry didn't look up from his notes, but his voice was firm. Don't thank us yet. We've got work to do. But Rick, your brother's not fighting this alone anymore. And neither are you. By morning, Celine Evans sat across from Dan in a gray concrete room. He looked older than 19, hollow-eyed, stubbled, collapsed under the weight. Your brother came to see you, Celine said, watching his reaction. Dan looked up sharply. Rick? They let him in. No, but he tried. He walked 3 miles to a motorcycle clubhouse trying to sell your helmet for $5 because he thought it might help pay for your defense. Celine leaned forward. That's how I'm here. The Iron Breed MC reached out to me. Dan pressed his palms against his eyes. He's 12. He shouldn't be dealing with this. He's 12 years old, and he understands loyalty better than most adults I've met. Celine's voice was gentle but firm. Now I need you to understand something. These people don't know you. They don't owe you anything. But Rick showed them what kind of person you raised him to be, and that was enough. So talk to me, Dan. Tell me what really happened at Murphy's. Dan's hands trembled. I was supposed to meet some guys. They wanted me to help with a job. Moving merchandise they said was clean. I knew it wasn't, but they kept offering more money and Rick needed new shoes, and our rent was late, and he exhaled shakily. I told them I'd think about it. Needed one drink to clear my head first. And then, I was in the parking lot when I heard shouting. 2 guys had this other guy on the ground, kicking him. Just brutal. Nobody was stopping it. Dan's voice hardened. I couldn't just stand there. I pulled one guy off, and he swung at me. I hit back. His friend came at me, and I shoved him into a car. Then the first guy charged again, and he stopped. I didn't mean to break his jaw. I just wanted them to stop. Celine wrote quickly. And the victim they were beating? Took off the second people started coming outside. I never even got his name. Dan laughed bitterly. Cops showed up, saw two guys on the ground and me standing there. Story wrote itself. The police report mentions witnesses. Yeah, the bartender and some customers. But they only saw the end, me hitting that guy. They didn't see what came before. Dan leaned back, chains rattling. My public defender said I should take a plea deal. 18 months minimum. Your public defender is overworked and underpaid. Celine tapped her pen against the pad. I'm not. And I've got a biker club digging up everything we need to show you're not some violent criminal. They're talking to your boss, Rick's teachers, your neighbors. They're building a case that you're a kid who lost everything and still showed up every day for your brother. Dan's eyes glistened. Why? Why would they do this? Because Rick walked into their clubhouse with a helmet and a cardboard sign, and somehow that meant something. Celine stood. I'll be in touch. Don't take any deals until I review them. And Dan, your brother's staying with Harry and his wife until this is resolved. He's safe. Dan nodded, unable to speak. At the clubhouse, Dakota had transformed the pool table into a war room. Documents spread across green felt. Character letters from Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Fisher sat in neat stacks. Tiny's cousin had provided a breakdown of sentencing guidelines and precedents for similar cases. Fred grinned as he hung up. Got him. Marcus Wilson, the guy who told Rick about the fight. He saw the whole thing from his car. He's willing to give a statement that Dan was defending someone. Harry marked it in his notebook. That's 3 witnesses now who can verify Dan's story. What about the victim? Still tracking him down. Bartender remembers he paid cash. No name on the tab. But he's got security footage we can subpoena. Fred glanced at Rick, who sat quietly in the corner doing homework Harry's wife had insisted he keep up with. Kid doing okay? He's scared, Harry said quietly. But he's holding together. Spent an hour last night telling my wife stories about Dan, teaching him to ride, fixing up that dirt bike in their apartment parking lot with borrowed tools. He smiled slightly. Kid worships his brother. Dakota finished typing on her laptop. Character summaries done. 4 pages documenting every sacrifice Dan made. Every time he put Rick first. I've got attendance records showing Rick hasn't missed a day of school in 2 years. That's all Dan. Medical records showing he took their mom to every appointment while working full-time. This paints a clear picture. Good. Harry stood, surveying the organized chaos. Celine's meeting with the prosecutor tomorrow to present evidence and push for reduced charges. She thinks if we can get the victim's testimony and prove Dan was defending him, we've got a shot at getting this knocked down to misdemeanor assault with probation. Tiny crossed his massive arms. And if the prosecutor won't budge? Then we show up at that arraignment in force and make sure the judge sees Dan's not alone. That he's got community support. That he's worth a second chance. Harry looked at each of them. This is what we do. We protect our own. Rick watched these people work. Coordinated, relentless. He'd spent months watching Dan crumble under pressure, seeing his brother get smaller and quieter as the world pressed down. Now strangers were fighting back against that weight, refusing to let Dan disappear into a system that didn't care about context or character. Harry noticed Rick watching and walked over, sitting beside him. How's the homework? Almost done. Rick hesitated. Mr. Harry? What if this doesn't work? What if the judge doesn't care? Harry was quiet for a moment. Then we try something else. And if that doesn't work, we try again. But giving up? That's not an option. Your brother didn't give up on you, and we're not giving up on him. Rick nodded slowly, then returned to his equations. Around him, the iron breed kept working, kept planning, kept proving that sometimes family isn't born. It's forged in moments when someone needs you to show up. And they'd shown up for Dan before he even knew to ask. Rick climbed the courthouse steps slowly, flanked by Harry and Dakota. Behind them, 12 Iron Breed members walked in formation, leather vests gleaming in the morning sun. Inside, the hallway buzzed with lawyers, defendants, and waiting families. Celine stood near courtroom 3, reviewing documents one final time. She looked up as they approached, her expression cautiously optimistic. We got lucky, she said quietly to Harry. The victim came forward yesterday. His name's David Taylor. He's a college student who was leaving his shift at the restaurant next door when those guys jumped him for his wallet. He's testifying today. And the prosecutor? Harry asked. Still pushing for jail time, but I think the judge will see reason once she hears everything. Celine crouched to Rick's level. Your brother's going to see you in there. Stay strong for him. Okay? Rick nodded, gripping the helmet he'd brought with him. The courtroom filled quickly. Rick sat front row, surrounded by the Brotherhood. When the side door opened and Dan was led in wearing the clean clothes Dakota had brought him, their eyes met across the room. Dan's face went through a dozen emotions. Shock, relief, shame, gratitude. His gaze swept over the leather vests filling the benches, then back to Rick. Rick held up the helmet slightly, just enough for Dan to see. I didn't sell it. We're going to be okay. Judge Patricia Parker entered, and everyone rose. She was silver-haired, stern, with 20 years on the bench and a reputation for fairness without mercy. The matter before the court is People versus Dan Hayes. She reviewed the file with steady, unreadable eyes. Mr. Hayes, you're charged with aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury. How do you plead? Celine stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. And we'd like to present evidence and testimony that provides critical context to the events in question. The prosecutor, a tired-looking man named Stevens, objected immediately. Your Honor, the facts are clear. Mr. Hayes broke another man's jaw. The severity of the injury speaks for itself. Context always matters in my courtroom, Mr. Stevens. Judge Parker gestured to Celine. Proceed. What followed was a meticulous dismantling of the prosecution's narrative. Celine called David Taylor first, a soft-spoken young man who testified that Dan had saved him from a brutal beating, possibly worse. He'd been too scared to come forward initially, worried the attackers would find him, but the iron breed had tracked him down and convinced him that justice mattered. He didn't know me, Taylor said, his voice shaking slightly. He could have walked away, but he didn't. He got hurt protecting me. Next came Marcus, who'd witnessed the fight from his car and confirmed Dan's account. Then Mr. Patterson, who spoke about Dan's work ethic and responsibility despite being barely out of high school himself. Mrs. Fisher described how Dan never missed a parent-teacher conference, how Rick's grades and attendance were perfect because of his brother's dedication. Dakota's character letter was entered into evidence, along with medical records documenting Dan's care for their dying mother and statements from neighbors about how he'd protected Rick from their stepfather's violence. Throughout it all, Dan sat motionless, tears streaming silently down his face. Finally, Judge Parker asked Dan to stand. Mr. Hayes, what do you want for your future? Dan's voice was rough. I want to be someone my brother can look up to. I want to give him the life our mom dreamed about. Safe, stable, where he doesn't have to worry about anything except being a kid. He glanced at Rick. I want to be the man he thinks I am. When she spoke, her voice had softened just slightly. Mr. Hayes, what you did was reckless and dangerous. You put yourself at serious risk, and you caused significant injury to another person. However, I cannot ignore the circumstances. You acted to defend someone who was being brutally attacked. You have demonstrated consistent responsibility for your minor brother despite facing circumstances that would break most adults. The letters presented on your behalf paint a picture of someone who deserves an opportunity to prove they can do better. She paused, and Rick held his breath. I'm reducing the charges to misdemeanor assault. You'll serve 18 months probation, complete 200 hours of community service, and attend mandatory anger management counseling. You'll also be required to check in monthly with a probation officer. She looked directly at Dan. I'm giving you a chance, Mr. Hayes. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Your Honor. Thank you. Dan's voice broke. Outside, the autumn air felt lighter. Dan pulled Rick into a fierce hug, and Rick held on like he'd never let go. I'm sorry, Dan whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. You're home, Rick said. That's all that matters. Harry approached, extending the helmet. I believe this belongs to you. Dan took it, running his fingers over the names written inside. I can't ever repay you for what you did. You can repay us by being the brother Rick already knows you are. Harry smiled. And by showing up next Saturday. We're throwing a cookout, and you're both expected. That Saturday, Rick and Dan arrived at the clubhouse on the old dirt bike, its engine sputtering but running. Tiny took one look at it and shook his head with mock despair. We're fixing that properly. Can't have family riding around on a death trap. Fred handed Rick a small package. Inside was a patch. Not a full member's vest, but something special. Little brother of the breed, embroidered in silver thread. Rick stared at it, then looked up at the faces around him. Harry, Dakota, Tiny, Fred, Celine, all the people who'd shown up when he'd had nothing but a helmet and hope. Welcome home, Harry said simply. Dan's arms settled around Rick's shoulders, and Rick finally understood what home meant. Not the empty apartment waiting for them, but this people who chose to stand when you needed them. People who proved that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about showing up. And the Iron Breed had shown up when it mattered most. Rick walked into that clubhouse alone, carrying everything he had left. He walked out with something he didn't know he needed. Proof that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when the world walks away. If the story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that remind us what it means to stand together. See you in our next video.